Welcome back, everyone, to the Darkest Theory podcast. I am Subtle alongside ScrapBrain.
What up?
So, we are kind of doing a follow up to the initial announcement of the upcoming end transmission chapter with the Singularity and some perks and stuff. They've updated a few things that are coming out with the chapter that comes next week, and they also, a few days ago, came out with a Reddit AMA where they kind of gave some insight on what things we can expect, things that we shouldn't be expecting, and things that are more a little bit up in the air. So we'll kind of get to that as well. We're going to start with kind of briefly going over the few patch notes that are coming with the full launch of the upcoming chapter. So the big thing is the Singularity, right? The new killer. We kind of talked about it in the previous episode where the EMPs were an important sort of counterbalance to the power being ridiculously strong once it kind of gets going. So it was essential to keep the EMP intact. But the EMPs were a little bit too accessible, replenished a little bit too fast potentially. So they kind of did a little bit of both. They reduced the number of supply cases that spawn on the map from 7 to 5, and they also upped the passive recharge time at the supply cases from 80 to 90. And also, while you're holding an EMP, to kind of prevent survivors from chaining multiple EMPs together. If you're holding an EMP, you can't see the auras of nearby supply boxes anymore. So they did a few things to try to mitigate the impact of the EMPs, but not get rid of them entirely. So that way the killer actually has some meaningful counterplay, but just maybe not as frequent. You have to be a little bit more deliberate, not get tagged by the biopods as often. If you want to kind of give your thoughts on how you feel like they addressed maybe some of the concerns that we in the community had.
Yeah, I think that the fact that they adjusted the power in this way keeps the. I mean, we talked about it before. The power felt in a good place. Just the EMPs felt a little too impactful. So I'm glad that they didn't you know make it easier to tag somebody or adjust numbers in some other ways. I think that this was a pretty clever and subtle way. Definitely no pun intended there. Holy shit. Um, a nice little way of adjusting the actually problematic part, as opposed to some things that I think may have been based off of how they've designed or implemented changes in the past, how they may have approached it previously. In particular, the fact that you don't see the auras of the boxes when you're holding an EMP. We've seen hints of stuff kind of like that with the iridescent limit configuration with Pinhead, how they'll play around in certain situations where you'll hide, or with Pig, when your bear trap isn't active, you won't be able to see the aura of the puzzle box locations. And I think that that's like a pretty clever way of going about it. Just like with the Pig boxes, if you just see them on your own, then you're totally fine. So with the Singularity as a survivor, I can hold an EMP and loop by a box that I have just visually seen on my own I know is ready to grab another one. So I can still utilize a chain of the EMPs if I am observant enough and loop in the correct location, which is still very powerful. But that's an extra level of skill that I have to have. I have to have seen it, and I have to loop properly to stay in that area. So I think that that's like a really clever way of going about it without making the power too oppressive for the killer or the counterplay to be too oppressive for the survivor.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. You were mentioning Pig, kind of similar to the Resident Evil vaccines and sprays in the opposite way, right? Where it's only while you're infected that you can see the supply crates. So this is kind of
Right.
the opposite. It's like if you don't have an EMP, you can see the supply crates, but once you have one, it's kind of similar thing where there's aura hiding at different times. I think it is good. Yeah, it's like it does add some counterplay in that you can now try to like scout the map ahead, similar to like how you would scout out to see if pallets or other resources are nearby. It's kind of like that, just that the EMPs factor into like your resource sort of understanding.
And the fact that when you're not holding an EMP, you only see the supply crates within a certain aura means that you have to actually do that scouting in advance. When For example, with the Resident Evil killers, when you get infected with whichever virus it is, you see map wide where all of the supply crates. When you aren't holding an EMP, you still only see the supply crates within a certain radius. So you don't have that free information just at the start of the game of, oh, this is where all of the boxes are. So I know where I can grab this one and then I can head to this other. I would have to do this scouting in advance before I pick up an EMP in the first place.
Yeah, it'll remain to be seen about how they kind of do the spawn logic. Like, I would hope that they're relatively spread out for both sides. Like, I think it's better if they're further away from one another, so it'll force you to scout more while also not like having them overlap. Where like this area of the map basically can't really be looped effectively because you're always going to have like two EMPs that people can use back to back. Also, having fewer EMPs means that you'll have to be a little bit more deliberate with them. You can't use them as often, so maybe grouping up so that way one EMP can sort of like remove a tag from a bunch of people at once if multiple people were tagged individually. That might be a way to sort of conserve them. So yeah, I think it keeps the power, this like keeping the power the same, keeping the counterplay the same, just making the counterplay not as accessible as often was like a pretty simple way of trying to rebalance it while not like overhauling the power or anything like that. And I think it'll feel relatively the same from both sides. It's just that it won't feel as unmanageable from the killer side, which was kind of the main complaint I think coming out of the PTB. They also as a quality of life thing, which were things that I hadn't even really thought to add, but basically if there's a biopod that's been disabled by an EMP, it's going to be more visually apparent. They added some like red lines and some more aura stuff like that to make sure that the killer, when they look through it, is more quickly able to realize that like, oh, okay, this biopod has been hit by an EMP. And they also are going to put a power meter around the power, like a box that will show how long until the overclock effect, so you don't have to sort of just uh, guess essentially on whether you're going to have it to get, try to tank a hit through a pallet or have the faster vault speed, vault the kick speed, stuff like that. So I think pretty simple. They didn't want to go anything crazy, and I guess we'll kind of see how that plays out in live matches. um
Yeah,
the
so real
Yeah, go
quick
ahead.
before we move on, with the power indicator for overcharge, I think that's like a really small step towards an issue that we talked about a few weeks ago, which is consistency with like how killer powers work. Like in order to charge up your overcharge or the length that the overcharge lasts, having that bar is consistent with pretty much every other killer power, and I think that that's great. I am all for consistency in the game.
Yeah, I mean, like Myers and Oni, I think come to mind in terms of like things that are on a timer before, like where you're in your special mode for X amount of time. But now you have like the visual indicator that like all those other killers generally have. The Speaking
From
of,
the way that it
yeah, go ahead.
listed it, it seemed more like it's around, yeah, more like Myers, where it's around the portrait
Hmm.
or like recharging the cooldown on artist crows or um
Leatherface on his like charges, stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. It didn't seem, we can't test it yet. We'll be able to in a few days, but it didn't seem like the hillbilly charge up for the revving or
Yeah, not the bar.
um yeah, or Oni's or yeah. Anyway, but yeah, I think that that's a really good change and lends more to some consistency with the rest of the game.
Yeah, and the other thing, which was pretty much the big concern that we had from which isn't even related to the new content from the PTB, was this change this buff that they gave to Pyramid Head, which was if you get hit by his M2 shot, not just having to walk through the trail, you're already tormented. They've just completely gone back on that change. They said that they're not planning to keep that change in or add it at a later time, that they want to do something with Pyramid Head, but they're going to kind of go back to the drawing board and try and figure something else out. As we'll talk about in the AMA, they also addressed that a little bit. But that's really good. As we pretty much went in depth last episode, this was not a killer that needed a buff like that. Certainly not to that magnitude. I think, some way of redesigning the killer to have torment be a more regularly accessible mechanic, if it's done in a healthy way, could be a way to go about it. But I don't necessarily have a great answer to how they might go about implementing that, but in the meantime,
Yeah,
this was not having this is better than leaving it in, I think, for sure.
yeah. I mean, there's not too much to say. It's just like having that as an accessibility for Torment, like the ability to cage somebody and bypass all these perks and have them get teleported to the other side of the stage. That's like a really powerful effect. So you have to be very delicate in how you balance how easy it is to get people tormented in the first place. So all I'm gonna say is that the change was bad, and I'm really glad that they went back on it.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of a more controversial change, as we talked about a lot, we'll start with the survivor side, and then we'll touch on the killer perk changes. But the only survivor perk that they changed was the one that people, as we noted, people were freaking out about. We didn't understand all of the hoopla surrounding the perk, which is scavenger. So scavenger is the perk where after you deplete a toolbox and you're holding the empty toolbox, the the perk activates, and on the PTB you had to hit 4 great skill checks, and once you hit your 4th great, it would automatically replenish. You couldn't start getting those tokens for the perk ahead of time while the toolbox still had charges left. It was only once it was fully depleted. People were super concerned, as I kind of noted in some of my playtesting on the PTB. It's not the easiest thing to get skill checks when you don't have a toolbox up and going, and 4 skill checks can take a while to show up, and you got to hit all the greats. And you're dedicating, as we noted, you're dedicating your perk slot. You're dedicating possibly multiple perk slots if you're someone that feels like you need to run something like stakeout or hyper focus or things to make it worth it. Plus all of your add-on slots, all that kind of stuff. Um, People have
And to
go ahead.
note for the change, on the PTB, it only worked one time, which
Correct.
is relevant because of how they changed it.
Yeah, so you could do that once per trial. It now has unlimited uses, which sounds great, except that they pretty much gutted the other part of it, which is that after you empty the toolbox and the perk activates, you are hit with a minus 50% debuff for on your generator repair speeds. So if you look at, we'll have to
For
test
30
for 30
seconds.
seconds. Yeah. So we'll have
Yeah.
to test exactly how that debuff factors into how much time you lose. We were talking about the weird sort of math and the way that they calculate debuffs and
Before we
penalties.
started up this recording,
Yeah.
we were talking back and forth for like 20 minutes just because of how dogshit behavior has their calculations.
Yeah.
It's unclear how we our best guess is it's either 10 or 15 seconds that you're losing out on if you're holding onto the generator that entire time.
Yeah. Over the 30
Now,
seconds.
right. Now, if you're not on the generator during that time, then that 50% debuff won't apply to you during those 30 seconds. But then you're getting 0 gen progress as opposed
Yeah.
to, 50%. So continue.
Yeah, so we'll have to see when we test and just sort of time hit a timer to see exactly, or I guess just have to detect. I don't even know how we would figure out exactly how much gen progress we're getting done, because 10 to 15 seconds eyeballing it will be a little bit hard to visualize. But uh, you also now have to hit 5 great skill checks, which takes a while. There are people who are trying to say this is somehow a buff just because you can use it multiple times, but again, if we're assuming around 15 seconds you're losing over the course of 30 seconds with that debuff, and you have to hit 5 greats before you can replenish it again to save a maximum of like 20 seconds with a perk. So the net is 5 seconds, and as you noted, if your solution to this 30-second debuff is to not be on the gen for the 30 seconds, that's losing 30 seconds of progress you could have done if you didn't have this perk. So I really don't see how this perk does anything meaningful. It allows you to have multiple toolboxes, so if you need to do like multiple bursts of generator, I don't know if it's like you leave your toolbox at like 1%, or you don't use up the toolbox until right as you're about to finish a gen, so then the 30 seconds is while you're like going between gens. But then even then you still need to go and get the 5 great skill checks. Like that doesn't solve that issue, which is still going to
Right.
probably take you, getting 5 greats on a full generator is probably going to take you close to a full generator to get in most circumstances. So I don't really see how you're going to get multiple valuable uses out of this perk you can add if you want. I just don't really understand, but they basically gutted the perk before it even went to live because of people being concerned.
I mean, as somebody who has on multiple occasions done 5 generators during the course of our matches, um, okay, so you do this optimal play, you use your toolbox. Right at the end, you actually complete the toolbox, you empty it so that the 50% debuff is applying as you're running to the next generator, which is somehow 30 seconds away regardless. Then you spend the whole next generator getting 5 greats that you definitely hit. You don't hit any goods. You always hit the greats. Then on your third generator, you save another whole 20 seconds. This is assuming that I've done 3 out of the 5 generators by myself. And I save now 20 seconds in this optimal setup. Keep in mind, the first 20 seconds that I save is just from the toolbox. In this mythical, magic Christmas land world, the first 20 seconds is saved by the toolbox, and then the second generator gets me the refill on the third generator, which then saves me 20 seconds. This is 3 gens worth of progress to save 20 seconds, as opposed to an exhaustion perk that can, multiple times throughout the course of the game, allow me to extend my chase for arguably longer than that, multiple times through the game, without me having to do 3 generators to see any of this value. It's absurd. And the fact that, oh, it's a buff because it can activate more than once now. Okay, so I have to do all 5 generators by myself.
Right.
I'm doing all 5 generators while all of my teammates are doing fuck all. And the whole upshot is that I save 40 seconds to literally not play the game except by holding M1.
Yeah, I mean,
It's dumb.
Yeah, people have been talking about like this concern that like, well, what if all 4 people run it? If all 4 people manage to deplete their initial toolbox and hit 5 skill checks, the gens are going to be done before you can even use your toolboxes for the second time. And if the survivors are allowed to be that efficient, you were losing if the perk didn't exist anyway. Like they were getting all four out regardless. So I don't understand how this perk factors in at all. Like how I just don't see how this perk solves anything. The only thing that I was saying is like this could be comboed in a weird way if you're doing like a bunch of saboing is like a way to try to like be doing gens while also like passively recharging your toolbox without having to go in the locker for build to last. But at that point, like just use build to last. Like it's more consistent and like
Well, you've also gotten like 8 sabages at that point.
Yeah, it's just like
how many games do you get 8 sabages?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like I don't like unless you're doing right, like you're doing one of the tome challenges that or something that you have to like sabo a ton, like or like what does this help other than the potentially the tome challenge or something where you gotta like deplete multiple toolboxes in full, but like built to last
lets you do 4.
Yeah, built to last doesn't like full recharge it, so you can deplete it faster because it's having less charges. So like it's not even optimal for that. It just lets you get like a different way and you can keep doing it.
I mean,
I just don't see
honestly,
how this perk does anything.
Scavenger was so mid before, and it's like actively bad now. And it's crazy to me that people are saying that that the first version was amazing and that this version is somehow better. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
I think it's actively bad.
Yeah, I think that this perk isn't like on the level of like self-care where it's like making you worse. I just don't think the perk is doing anything. Whereas like the previous
it could make you worse if you spend those 30 seconds off the generator.
Yeah, if you get I guess if you're doing that, if you're getting off the gen and just like staring at it or something like if you're like, well, I'm not
looking at you.
Yeah, I'm not doing gens if I have minus 50%. Like
well, but this is similar to some other things where it could incentivize people. Okay, well, I've done my portion of the gen. Now I'm gonna go fuck off and cleanse doles or search a chest for no reason or run at the killer.
Yeah, like you'd be better off, I think, if your concern is if you're trying to get value out of the toolbox, the best way to get like efficient gen repairs is to not run scavenger and just run the good toolbox and run something else that gives you gen speed. Like there's plenty of things that are going to give you a slight boost, or
Mhm.
even a more significant boost. I know that we were talking about the overzealous with the 3 boons build and stuff. Like there are plenty of other options. Yeah, that like
When you get that hex
yeah, like
on the
there's
overzealous, oh baby.
yeah, like there's plenty of other ways to get a lot of gen speed value that doesn't involve like actively sandbagging your repair speed with a perk. It just doesn't really
Yeah.
make sense to me. We won't elaborate further, but like I guess you guys
It's
won.
dog shit.
Yeah, like good job. I guess the perk's dead before it was alive, so there we go. We'll touch on the two killer perks fast. These are not really massive overhauls. They just tweaked a little bit of the numbers. Machine learning, which we said is awful, which is the one where when you finish, you can like compromise a generator. Basically, like the last gen that you kicked is assigned the compromised state, and if that gen gets popped while it's compromised, you get 30 seconds of undetectable with a haste effect. The haste effect was up from 7% to 10%. So 3%, a little bit faster. They made so instead of like the issues that like our concern with the perk, as we talked about, was it's hard to get it to proc, but they didn't make the perk easier to proc. They just made the proc stronger, which I don't think solves the issue. That's like with the perk, like that's not going to solve
Right.
and make it a
Yeah, I
more
mean the
applicable
the
effect.
the effect went from extremely powerful to slightly more extremely powerful, but it's still one of those things where, yeah, you'll probably get the effect like once per match, maybe twice if you're really lucky,
Yeah, if you
and
got
that's
yeah,
not any different.
and again, as we talked about, like it's something that like actively doesn't synergize with like kicking generators and stuff in a lot of ways. So or protecting gens, like you have to let gens get finished. So
Run it with
it's
coup and fire up.
yeah, it's a weird one. But I guess they tried to make it better. We'll see. And then forced hesitation is the one where any survivors within 16 meters after another survivor gets downed is hit with a pretty significant hinder effect. It was 15% hindered, which was already massive. Now it's 20%, which is more massive. I don't really feel like this changes all that much. Like you're just still insanely slow. Now you're just a bit slower. I don't think in practice this is going to change how the perk sort of plays. It's just a little more guaranteed, but they're
You're
trying
running
to
through honey instead of water.
yeah, like you're still going very very slow. It's still a short range, which was the main thing that we were like that probably keeps this perk in check is that the range is so limited. It's not like a terror radius thing; it's specifically 16 meters only. Um, uh, okay, I guess that we'll see how that plays out, but I don't think that
Again,
that's going to matter all that much.
just the same concern that I had last time where it affecting somebody that so somebody's coming for the unhook, they get hit on the way, they do the unhook, and right after the person lands and their iframes of getting unhooked are gone, then they down the person who did the unhooking. Now the person who got unhooked is slowed by 20%. It again, just like before this buff went through, it makes it easier to then tunnel because that 20% reduction completely and totally offsets the speed burst that they get by getting hit. So now it's then easier to tunnel the person off hook. That's just worse now, and I think that was like the arguably strongest use for this perk, which is an unhealthy way to play.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, I still don't think this perk is very good. And again, it like the slowdown is ridiculous, but the only concern that I have about the perk is how it could potentially be played off of an unhook.
yeah, and I think with them talking about in the anniversary stream about them trying to address like the face camping, right, being too close to the hook, that seems like the best way that this would synergize. And we know that that other change is coming at some point, so there's going to be a slight period, a small, relatively small period of time where this isn't running alongside when that like self unhook face camping counter
Hopefully,
sort
a small
of
period of
yeah
time. We'll see.
relatively yeah you would think maybe a few months, but Again, I don't really see. I can't imagine this being something other than like I don't really see what this helps counter. Like you probably were already able to do this before the hinder was increased, so I just don't see what this even further hinder really impacts. But they tried to
Yeah,
buff
so
those two perks quick.
when we were talking about the changes to the Singularity's power, like this is the kind of changes that they're more used to making, and I think I don't know, it's weird that in the same change where they did a really clever way of kind of addressing something being too powerful against the killer, they just did their normal like go-to changes on some other stuff, just like tweaking some numbers, but not really changing what makes the perk problematic in the first place.
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know.
like something like if you were to try to compare like these kind of changes to something they could have done with Singularity, it would have been like increasing the like kick or vault speed with overclock, or like making the overclock last like slightly longer or something like that, and then just leaving
Yeah.
everything else as it was. And that's kind of what they just did with these without fundamentally like getting to the root of why these perks are pretty like niche and limiting
Yeah,
at
like
best.
I mean, I even think that something more interesting like increase the range on force hesitation, make it tear radius based, but lower the hinder to like I don't know 5% or 7% or something like that. Like at least that would because the issue was the reason why the perk was not the best in our estimation was because the range of it was so low. Well, fix the range of it because that's a problem, but to compensate for that, lower the effect of it. They they did the opposite. They increased the effect without making the problematic part of the perk, just like with machine learning. They didn't make it easier to activate. They just made the effect of when you do activate it stronger.
Yeah,
And I think that that's like the opposite approach that you
they
need to
just sort of
take
like
for
doubled
these.
down on their initial design by just being
Yeah,
like, no, this is how we want this perk to work, rather than like seeing why this perk isn't going, like these perks are not going to be run more
yeah.
than likely very often, and are just going to be in the massive pool of perks on both sides that just never see play, unfortunately. um but that pretty much wraps up. Glad they went back on the pyramid head change, glad with the emp changes. Not as happy with the perk changes, but those are the
Some
only,
hits, some misses.
yeah, those are the only perks that were getting adjusted. The other three were being left alone. But we were going to kind of transition to the Reddit thread, where they kind of address some different things. So one of the big topics that they touched on was the Twins rework. A while ago, probably close to a year now, this was something that they teased that was like, Twins is what we're working on for a big rework. We don't like how there's a bunch of problems with them. Um, this didn't even address the long period of time for several months where they were like game breakingly bugged, where basically the Twins would just lose access to their power, or lose the ability to play the game, like literally couldn't
Yeah,
move.
couldn't move, couldn't
Yeah.
attack.
So that is apparently still happening. They have an ETA of early next year, early 2024. Uh, they didn't really hint at anything in terms of what's going to be incorporated in that. I know some people have speculated like that the transition time is too long. It's annoying to have to like get it down with Victor and then walk all the way over to get like a pickup if you want to go for hooks, which is why so many Twins playstyles revolve around like just constant slugging and just continue to get hits until you latch onto someone who's healthy. But uh,
Theory. You ready? You ready
sure.
for this? When Victor gets it down, he sucks your life essence out and grows to be 8 feet tall and can hook you
Oh
himself.
God.
And then taking the hook like drains the energy back from him and he goes back down to like a foot and a half.
I still think it would be hilarious if Victor just like, instead of carrying, you just like drag them behind
Drags.
you.
Oh, that'd be so hype.
Like
And then he
you
like
just like
Super
onto
Mario
the hook,
64s. He
or
Super
yeah,
Mario
just like
64
throws.
spins and throws you onto the hook.
I think that
That's
would be.
hype.
I think that would be so funny if they did something
That's
like that.
hype.
Um, but we'll see what that. Any thoughts on that? I know they gave us pretty much not much to work with other than it's still happening.
Yeah, it's been so long since they said that they were going to rework it. Twins is if not the least played killer, the second least. The only one that I can think might see less play is Hag, but
Hmm.
I think it's number one least played. And there's a reason for that. Uh, it's not fun to play against in its current state, or they're not fun to play against in their current state. And the transitions, the game breaking bugs, the general playstyle is not appealing to most players. I think there's like 2 dedicated Twins players in the world.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm exaggerating with that. Um, so something that they can do, even if it's not, as long as it's not like game breakingly strong, if they just change it to like see what they can do with it, it's unlikely to be worse than what we have now.
Yeah, I would
It's
agree.
possible, but it's unlikely.
Yeah. Some of the other killers that they mentioned in a series of a few questions, that were on their radar slash in the works that are actively, like, definitively getting changed. Hillbilly, they said, a power rework. Someone asked about the overheat mechanic and how it's people have complained about that for quite some time. That there's some Hillbilly update coming that includes add-ons. Freddy is also on their radar. Freddy, pretty notably, one of the weakest killers in the game, who has add-ons that make his power worse. And then Pyramid Head, as we talked about, another one that's very much on their radar as they tried to showcase in the PTB, something they want, a killer that they want to change. Someone also asked about add-ons. They said that that's noted. So all of those sort of in the forecast of killers beyond Twins that they want to rework. No sort of ETA on that. Any thoughts on, like, those announcements or things you'd like to see from any of those killers in particular?
So, boy, the thing about those 3 killers in particular is between all 3 of them, there's about 7, 8 useful add-ons between all 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
They all need add-on passes desperately. Hillbilly, I don't know why they're so obsessed with the overheat mechanic. Nobody wants it. On either side, it's not problematic. Like not having the overheat mechanic is not problematic. They should just get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um Hillbilly players are rare and like they're pretty fun to play against in my opinion. So make them more accessible to people. It seems fine to me. Freddy not only needs add-on he's got like one good add-on, maybe 2 depending on play style, but oh my god, like yeah, his power is arguably one of the weakest in the game with the snares, made worse with the pallets. His only saving grace is his teleport, which is compared to like Sadako and Demo and the mobility of Nurse and Blight, like it just is underwhelming. I think that it's fun. Freddy was the first killer that I considered maining a long time ago, and it was entirely for the teleport mechanic, but so many killers just do it better now. Dredge is another one that has a
Mm-hmm.
better teleport mechanic, and it's just like he needs to he needs to be in a spot in between where he is now and where he was like a year and a half ago. He needs to have better, more consistent add-ons. His power needs to be buffed in some regard or full on changed. And honestly, he's just not interesting. Like the dream world is not. It just fucks up people with poor computers and looks a little different. Like that's really all there is, and it's just boring. And then Pyramid Head again, he's got his range add-on, got the duration add-on. That's it. I mean, his power is very strong, like we talked about before. Being able to cage people and having control over when you cage people versus when you hook people, and you having the judgment to be able to choose when it's right to do that, as opposed to it being made for you. Like he's a very strong killer. His add-ons are just bad. So many of his add-ons are completely useless.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how uh, some of the Skull Merchant add-ons. Skull Merchant's like yellow add-on is basically the same thing as Pyramid Head's Iridescent add-on, except way better because it's more consistent.
I
His
mean, think
add-ons are just have been terrible the entire time.
I was gonna say, think about like prior to her most recent like rework, her brown add-on that gave you the ability to break traps if you had the claw trap on. Her brown add-on was so good that they were like, well, everyone's gonna run it. Let's just make it base kit. And it's like to like her brown add-on was ridiculous, and like Pyramid Head has like nothing. I guess like the only thing with like Freddy is, as someone who used to actually play a good amount of Freddy, even when he was worse prior to his first rework, where he had the ability where he basically was invisible and you could only hear the lullaby when you were awake, and then he would basically have to like click on you with his power, and then you would gradually fall asleep after a few seconds, and you would see him intermittently in that point. It was weak, but at least it was interesting and like gave you this like
And it was thematic too.
it was really thematic and gave you this like cool weird like stealth thing. I don't know if they ever try to like re-explore doing something along those lines.
And
um
just to be clear, because this was a long time ago that they changed this. This is
mhm.
before I started playing. And you can speak to this better than I can, but it used to be like you said that he was completely invisible, only here, but you couldn't damage the
Correct,
survivors in
yeah.
any way. You couldn't you could swing, but you couldn't hit them, right?
Hmm.
You had to pull them into the dream world, and then you could hit them. So it's kind of in a very like squint your eyes kind of way, similar to Nemesis, where you have to hit them with the tentacle before you can actually damage them with the tentacle again. Uh,
Or like Wraith can't do anything when he's like cloaked, but you can like go up next to them.
yeah.
But like Wraith is like a little more definitive, and is like he's supposed to be like faster while he's cloaked, so he can like kind of body block, and plus he gets the speed boost when he comes out of it. So like there were some cool things about that, like you said, even thematically, but I don't really know what they're gonna do as far as like his power, but it like clearly needs to be addressed. And like the sad thing is that I think the palettes are like funnier, like there are more
It's
interesting.
really cool. Yeah,
Like
it's much more interesting and it's cool. It's just bad.
I don't know if that's something that they like. It almost feels weird that like the two are separate. Like I almost feel like they could just give him the ability to have both, to like lay
Kind of
traps in
like the
different
clown
ways.
bottles.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Where you can like pick which one that you're putting down at a certain time. Like that might be a way to try to give him a boost. But I think like as long as you don't give him the slowdown add-ons that were like really oppressive, right? That was the most problematic thing before his rework, was that like his slowdown add-ons were just additional slowdown perks. Like they weren't baby slowdown perks. Like they were insane. And so it would be nice if they could just give him something more interesting without something that is just oppressive.
So I'll agree with that. The time period that Subtle's talking about now is a time period that you can look back to called Forever Freddy, where the swing chains and the jump rope just caused you to perform action slower. Now, I do think that that's both boring and a little problematic, but I think the thing that made that more problematic were the perks that went along with it at the time that have since gotten affected in some way, notably thanatophobia. Like that was the big offender back then.
Mm-hmm.
And thanatophobia got ridiculously changed to the point where I don't think that that would be problematic anymore.
Mm-hmm.
However, those add-ons are still just uninteresting. At least they fucking did something though, as
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah.
making footsteps if the survivors in the dream world louder. Like,
Like I almost think
I don't
it's
know.
at the like I almost think he's weak to the point where you probably shouldn't be able to wake yourself up without the clock. Like it's like that level where like even like original, like I was talking about, where you have to point and click to put them to sleep and you couldn't hit them until they were asleep. That was one of the ridiculous playstyles, is that like you could even wake yourself up out of the falling asleep state, where like you could be on a gen, you could see that the Freddy click on you and you were starting to fall asleep, but if you like mashed and got a skill check, you would reset that timer and you'd have to click on you again. So like you could just like do this weird standoff as long as you were happening to get skill checks, whether same with like if you were healing or something. So like there was definitely problems with that, which is why they reworked it. But he's just in such a weak state that like even if it was something as simple as boosting the tools that he has, like 5 tokens or whatever it isn't, it like 5, it's something
Yeah.
ridiculously small. It's like how are you supposed to do anything? I don't really I don't really know what else beyond that, but and yeah, Pyramid Head we've talked about plenty. Needs real
I,
add-ons. Billy is basically left with like engravings and like low pro, and that's kind of it.
I will say the one thing that kind of concerns me is that there was no mention of blight add-ons in the opposite direction. However, I'll say that this was an AMA and it doesn't appear that anyone asked them about blight add-ons, but sure, like again, buff the add-ons for killers that I wouldn't say that Pyramid Head needs buffs in any way, but give him some interesting add-ons, sure. But like it's been like
A
two or more
long
years,
time.
Blight. Come on.
Yeah, it
But
is definitely concerning. I know we talked about Skull Merchant, so we can talk about that briefly. They are, as they noted with the Deja Vu buff that we talked about from the PTB, they're very much aware of 3 gen playstyles, which is why they changed Eruption, Call of Brine Overcharge. They're aware that Skull Merchant is incredibly good at implementing a 3 gen strategy. They noted both in the AMA that Skull Merchant is another killer that they want to rework. They said that they kind of like how some of her playstyle is. They just don't like that you can do this 3 gen thing. They're hoping that the 3 gen like adjustments that they make to the base gameplay, regardless of killer, will address some of the concerns that Skull Merchant has with how she's designed now, but that they acknowledge they're probably going to have to do something further with her. Any thoughts on Skull Merchant's future?
not really. I mean, if you're concerned about Skull Merchant 3-genning, I think that there are other ones that they need to take into consideration. Also, the Knight, Hag, maybe. Uh, I think that they're trending in the right direction, though. The fact that they, you know, pretty definitively nerfed the 3 gen kick perks that you were talking about. I think the biggest, like, problematic, and I say that in extreme quotes, for a 3 gen playstyle is Jolt or Surge. But I don't think that's problematic at all. But the fact that it can still affect all 3 gens in a 3 gen situation is like very strong. But I don't think that, as it stands right now, I feel very confident in our games against a 3 gen that we'll win the battle with how the perks are shaping up right now and how the playstyle is. So I wouldn't say that 3 genning is dead or like not an issue, but I think we're trending in the right direction, and I'm not entirely concerned about it.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to add on to that is like I hope that the one of the best ways that they address that is just the way that the gen spreads are and the gen RNG is. Like one of the big changes they made recently also is Haddonfield, right? Where that main building is not a problem anymore with 3 gens. Like it is crazy how different that map feels, where like everything, the entire match was centered around main building because there was 2 gens there with like within 15 meters of each other, and another one sometimes in the street and at the building next to it, and then the hedges, and like they actually spread the gens out, and now it feels like a more realistic map. And there's plenty of other maps that suffer from that also. Thompson House is one that like jumps out to me, that just like puts a gen in main building and then sometimes like 2 on either side of the main building, and the other half of the map, or other like 3/4 of the map, have 2, like maybe a gen at shack and maybe one in the corn, and that's it.
Can we just talk about for a second? People, do not put generators inside of your house.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
not healthy.
That is not how that should go. But
But yeah, no, the fact that they've changed the map generation to help address stuff like that on Haddonfield in particular, it was ridiculous. You could literally be looking at the one, you could be at the one on the front porch on the side and see the 2 or 3 or 4 other gens just like directly there. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The map generation can fix a lot of this issue, which again, it's not a survivor thing or a killer thing. It's just like a general gameplay thing.
yeah, and I think that like the other thing with like 3 gens, right, is that like it only rewards play styles that where killer like it only rewards killers if they decide to play around the 3 gen. Killers that are looking for more like aggressive play styles, going for a lot of hooks, those gen setups are actually like actively detrimental because it like decreases the downtime required to go from generator to generator. So if the killer is just chasing other people, there's like a lot less of the map that's worth pressuring. So if you spread it
Right.
out,
So
then
if
like
you're using scavenger and you finish your generator, then the 30 seconds
true,
you'll get to your next gen in 5.
true. If they spread the gens out, that's a scavenger buff. So, but speaking of maps, maps were also like a topic of discussion that they addressed a little bit. This one was a little confusing. They basically were like, we didn't have the staffing to do with maps what we wanted to. That's why the Red Forest, Mother's Dwelling, Temple of Purgation reworks were just basically aesthetic only and like weren't being really redesigned for balance. Like that's what everyone was expecting Mother's Dwelling to have, like a reduced size and maybe some like redesign elements. That's why those were left out. That's their explanation. Um but now they said they're revisiting them. They said we have more people. We're going to go and actually redesign them again with this new cosmetic, like the way that they designed it now with this initial rework. Now they're like actually going to rework it. I don't really understand. It feels like a weird admission on their part to be like, we half-assed it because we had to. That's why it didn't come out that way, but we'll get to it for real. It seems like they wasted their time. That's what it feels like to me. If you want to add on that.
It's just weird cuz nobody asked for or expected a change to those maps. So they could have just waited until they were properly staffed to do both the visual redesign and the balance redesign at the same time. Nobody was clamoring for, hey, I really want these maps to look better. They do look better, they look great, but nobody was like, I really need my Mother's Dwelling to look 20% better. It's fine, other than the fact that when they did the visual redesign, they introduced a bunch of fat shames, which they still haven't addressed to my knowledge. Sure, that's not going to be a bad thing, them going through and theoretically it's not a bad thing that they're going to go through
Fixing
and
the
try and
maps.
rebalance maps.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the game,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
it's weird because there was a question like they what one of the questions that jumped out to me was someone was like, I don't understand your map design, like in terms of like you have like killer sided maps and survivor sided maps and stuff like that, and they were like, we never intended to make maps favor one side or the other, which just like I don't know how they could have this crazy range and that was their active design, like because that only means that they have no idea what makes like a balanced map. That's the only that's the only conclusion that I can take away. It's just a weird, like it was a weird series of admission. Like maps have always been like at the forefront of problems with Dead by Daylight. um and it's just a weird it's like surreal in a way where it's just like, how could this game be entering its like 7th anniversary and it's still very clear that they have no real understanding of map balance. Like as people point out, it's like, how could the last few maps be like the RPD rework and Garden of Joy and like Borgo? Those are their maps. Those are like their most, and this new map that they, as we'll talk about,
And
they
the Shelter Woods rework.
and Shelter Woods rework, yeah, a little bit. And there's just like the Eerie of Crows, I guess, somewhat. But like in terms of new maps, right? It's just like I don't understand how like if this is what we can expect, like and the new map that's coming out, the Total Landing or whatever, it's like you didn't learn your lesson. Like you keep creating these problematic maps that are like not fun to play, but also not balanced for the sides either. So it just feels like they haven't really figured out what the solution is.
They're definitely self-reporting here. Uh, they are. They couldn't possibly have been designing proper maps. They were in the vents the whole time. You know
Yeah, yeah.
that's what's going on. It's no hidden fact that their ideas on how they're designing maps is faulty at best. I just don't understand. There's so many people that play this game and so many people that have vested interests in the maps being designed properly that I don't get how we can get a Garden of Joy and we can get uh I don't know, insert your choice of Dead Dog. I don't know how we can get these maps with these wildly varied arrays on one side or the other when the developers have tools in the people who play the game. If there are tons of players who will gladly give their input to the devs free of charge. They don't need any kind of recognition or anything like that. They just want the game to play well and they just it's not quite as bad as like the 4.5.1 HUD redesign that they just jammed down our throats, but it's in the same vein where, hey, the community is telling you something very clearly, and we've been saying it for a while, and you're not picking up on it.
Yeah. Something that they did actually respond to is something that been, again, another thing that's been asked for a long time, which is different game modes. They said that that's actually something they are actively working on. No super definitive timetable. They're like optimistic sometime early mid next year, something like that. But they kind of stress that the general design is that they want them to be temporary. They don't want to take away from the main game mode. That's something that we've talked about plenty on our own. Is that increased game modes or like different queues for like casual and competitive sort of like players or anything like that, just sort of kind of separates out the player base and potentially threatens queue times and dividing the community, all that, those kind of concerns. But something to sort of change the playstyle would be very welcome. Some sort of like smaller mini games. I've had plenty of ideas that we've talked about before, like a like Huntress Dodgeball sounds awesome. Just put like a line where you can't like literally that there's some obstacle because you can't get over it, and it's literally just like throwing hatchets at each other until one team knocks out. Something simple like that. That's like goofy and really different than like the normal gameplay would be a nice change of pace.
The one that everybody talks about is a 2v8, which I have said since I first heard the suggestion, that seems, as somebody who plays more Survivor than Killer, that seems ridiculously Survivor sided to me. But that's what people have been talking about since before I started playing the game. That's something that's very clearly on their radar. I think that's cool. Something to mix it up. I do think, as you pointed out, that the key here is the word temporary. I am very concerned that if these alternate game modes, however fun they may be, if they get added permanently, that it can really cannibalize the player pool and make queue times go forever. Something that we've seen before, Fall Guys was a really popular game, and then they introduced multiple ways of playing it, multiple they called them
Like playlist, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so there wasn't any like if I load into this playlist, I cannot play with anybody in this playlist because they play different. And it was in it since they've introduced that, the different playlists have been fun, but it's been impossible to get full lobbies. And when you do get lobbies, it takes forever for them to fill out as much as you need in order to start it. And I'm pretty sure that Dead by Daylight has a much larger player base than Fall Guys at this point, but the point still stands that I queue times can already be pretty miserable at times, and things that will potentially make that even worse is questionable in
I
my
will
mind.
say that I know that like for Fall Guys, just as like an example, something that they have offered is like you could queue up for multiple playlists at the same time is something they added to try to address that problem. So that way you could just like fill whatever lobby for either game mode. You're basically like I'm flexible. I just want to play. So that
Table,
could
booth,
be
or first available.
yeah. So it's like that could be a solution in the meantime if they, but you also don't want them. My concern is that if they make these temporary game modes and people don't play them, then they're like, well, why did we waste our time putting them in the game? We're not going to do that anymore. And then like if they put these game modes in, we can't like let that opportunity go. I think it's going to be a weird line to sort of balance. Like, we need people to keep playing the main game, so they're not like, well, we can't put these in because then no one will play the main game, but we also can't not play it and then be like, everyone wants to play the main game. What's the point? So, like, there's got to be some weird balance there. Kind of circling back to an idea that to a PTB from a while back now, was this base kit unbreakable slash finishing Mori PTB that they talked about, where basically you could pick yourself up. It took longer as part of the base kit to pick yourself up than it does now, but you also had where the match would immediately end once the last survivor was put on the ground, so no one could pick themselves up. So it was an idea of like trying to prevent like slugging for the 4K sort of thing if it took too long, but also making it so that way you couldn't hold a game temporarily hostage as killer where you could just bleed people out. It's like you get the last person down and then the match ends. You get to the Mori animation more often rather than having to rely on an offering slash devour hope specifically slash one of those killers that has like a built-in Mori like Onryo or Pyramid Head.
Rancor, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
Rancor as well. Rancor is another one. But they have said that
Tombstone.
while they still want to put the finishing Mori into the base game, that the idea of unbreakable like self pickup in your base kit is like not happening. They were like, we're removing that. That's not happening. That's not in our plans anymore whatsoever. So that was something that was kind of like in the air for a while because everyone was like, whatever happened to that PTB? We got our answer, and it was that it's not happening anymore. So finishing Mori eventually, but that's off the table. The self pickup is off the table.
Honestly, as somebody who's been running exponential quite a bit lately, understandable. The You tweeted about this like a week or two ago. We had a game where all four of us were on the ground and we all picked ourselves up due to exponential, and we four out of that game.
Yeah,
Like, being able to pick yourself up is ridiculously powerful, and I'm not thrilled at the idea of the finisher Mori as it was in the PTB, but not having base kit unbreakable is fine by me.
yeah. I think there's plenty of ways to address, like they've put plenty of like ways to heal, right? They've got exponential. You have got now the boost to circle of healing. Now it's like more. It's still relying on teammates. We're gonna live forever. Other healing boosts like botany, or if we'll make it proc stuff like that. Like there, and obviously unbreakable still exists. So there are ways to deal with it, and um, I think that that's
Just
probably
run
the
no
better.
mither.
Yeah, that too. I think that that's like a pretty safe way to address it. Um, and then for in terms of like how they're monitoring stuff, they have basically said that while we talked about earlier where scavenger, machine learning, force hesitation, all of those perks are going to be changed for the live, made for this was one that kind of caused the start. That's the one that grants survivors a 3% haste when you're injured and also allows you to get endurance if you finish a heal on a teammate while you're injured. They are not changing that perk. Someone asked about that because they were still concerned about it, and they said that they're very much like paying attention to it. They're going to see how it plays out in matches, wait for feedback, look at data, all that kind of stuff. Apparently, they kind of just brought this up that they had some sort of contingency plan for hyperfocus when they released it. I guess that they had some concerns as and again similar as we talked about, like people were concerned about hyperfocus at the start, and that concern has pretty much gone away. um but made for this is kind of in the same vein where apparently they have like a fallback plan of like, we have a way to adjust this perk, the values, whatever, redesign it, whatever the case may be, in our back pocket already ready to go. That's relatively reassuring. I hope that this perk doesn't change all that much regardless. I don't think that it's like some crazy game breaking thing that some people are saying it is, but it is kind of nice to know that like they claim at least that they have like a an adjustment ready to go should it need one.
Yeah, I'm curious if that involves a kill switch or if it's something that they can just immediately change. It seems based off of prior experience that they would just kill switch it until they're able to enact the change that they have in mind. I'm not convinced that this. I don't think that this perk is bad by any means, but I don't think that it's as, yeah, I've seen the video of Aaron and somebody else, I think, where they're outrunning the killer when they have this and hope and dark theory and this and that and the other and whatnot. It's funny, but it's at the very end of the game and it takes a whole bunch of setup and it's a meme more than anything. But I don't think that this perk is bad, but I don't think that it's gonna be anything insane.
Yeah. Um, a few other things that I'll touch on quick. So they've talked about them toying with the idea of some new survivor items. They've toyed with the idea of changing the like offerings. That's something that they're kind of like looking at mixing up because there's plenty of like blood point and start with your survivor teammates or start separate from them or like a bunch of ones that really don't get run often, right? Like it's usually like Mori's, black or white wards, maybe the like hatch and basement spawns or like the really juicy blood point offerings like streamers, survivor pudding, escape cakes, the event ones, stuff like that. um so they're kind of looking at reworking a couple of things like that. uh Eventually slowly porting over cosmetics from the mobile version of the game. They toyed with the idea. Apparently they don't really like how the Shrine of Secrets works, which is something that as players who have played for a long time and have pretty much everything unlocked, that doesn't really apply to us. But it kind of just like doesn't really serve as much of a purpose as it used to with the way that stuff has been changed in terms of blood points and
Since the prestige
teachables,
change
yeah, and
also.
prestige change. Speaking of which, they've also talked about putting in an option to hide your prestige levels since people are worried about being like targeted because they have a high prestige, things of that nature. Any of those that kind of jump out to you that you wanted to sort of add on to?
I, we've talked with the two of us about information pre-game. The killer can see the survivors. He can see they can see the survivors' names, the survivors' prestige levels. They can check their Steam profile, presumably their PlayStation or Xbox profile. I've never played on console, but they have access to all of this stuff, and the survivors have access to no information for the killer. I think that that just in general should be more leveled out. But I know for a fact we've run across it where I've been playing like a P20 something character and you've been running your P100 Michaela or Ash, and the killer have said in post game, I targeted you because you're P100. And part of me is like, well, that's probably not the right outlook to have. You probably should not be targeting the more experienced players. But regardless, I it shouldn't be stuff outside of the game that makes that kind of an in-game impact. So I think that that's fine, especially if it's something that's optional. If you have the option of hiding your prestige level or showing your prestige level before a game starts, absolutely. I think that that's the best of both worlds. You as a player get to make that choice for yourself.
Yeah, I think that that's also good. The shrine is like I said, pretty outdated, so I understand that. Although they pretty much said straight away, nothing's like immediate. The
I honestly have almost never used the shrine, even when I was a new player. So
I used to use the
I'm
shrine for extra blood points. I used to convert your shards into blood points. That was all I used to use it
see,
for.
I just knew that I would get all of the perks at some point, so I was like, I'll just save my cards for cosmetics.
Yeah,
But yeah, it just never has applied to me, so I don't really have much of an.
yeah. Now that blood points are much more accessible, I don't bother interacting with the shrine anymore either. The unique survivor items are cool, right? Like one of the first ones that basically the first new item that was ever added was the firecracker, right? Which eventually got turned into a pseudo version with the perk with flashbang. Um, I don't really know. Like, I don't have any ideas as far as like what else could be added. I know that there are definitely item types right now, notably the key map, that don't really see any utility or use like at all for the most part at all. Um, I wonder if that's if like reworking those is somewhere factored into that, or just literally new items. I don't know what those could be, but it would be nice. Those could offer like a little bit more like freshness in terms of like different builds and different play styles and stuff, because like flashlights for example are like probably my favorite thing in the game. So it would be nice, that they definitely allow for like a lot of creativity items. So it would be cool as long as it's balanced and reasonable. Something that could make the game more fun, whether it's maybe a distraction. I'm like thinking of like a like Pebble, right? Like Pebble, but like as an item or something like that. You can kind of do that with Flashbang, but the issue is that you have to like basically drop it on yourself, so that's not nearly as useful. But something like that could be. That's the first time I thought of that, but that could be neat.
So, thoughts on this? I don't think that this is practical by any means, but it's an idea that I just had. A way of differentiating survivors from one another is giving them each individual survivor has a unique item. Maybe it's that, so like Claudette, for example, maybe she is able to equip a medkit, but Meg can't. Something like that.
I see what you're
Or
saying.
yeah, so a way of actually making a difference between the actual survivors as opposed to just cosmetics and how they scream, you know.
Yeah,
I don't think that that's practical by any means. People have across all of their accounts have billions of items of all different types across all of their characters, so I don't think that's practical.
and the
But
add-ons
just
for all
like from a
those,
hmm?
and the add-ons for each of those items too.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's practical at all. But just like from a theoretical like thought experiment, does that sound interesting?
Yeah, I thought that's something that they've toyed with a lot. Like I've heard, or as the community that we've toyed with a lot, right? Where like maybe you're forced to run one of your character's teachables has to like you can't like one of your perk slots is you have to run a teachable or that slot is like left empty. So you have to have some sort of like uniqueness tied to the survivor in that way, but the other three can be more customizable with stuff that you've unlocked. I do think that that would help make the survivors feel a little bit more unique, and also like as killer you could kind of like try and guess. Like that kind of goes on now where like right like you see Bill and you're just like unbreakable. It used to be like Bill BT
Our
unbreakable,
time,
right?
yeah.
Like that kind of used to be a thing. But yeah,
Or Lori with DS for sure.
yeah, Lori, yep, Lori with decisive for sure. But yeah, that's definitely faded a good amount. I think it could be interesting. The issue is that like it would have to be like, does each survivor have their own item, or is there like this group of like five survivors can use flashlights, this group can use medkits,
Yeah.
something like that. Like I guess is what it would have to be. And then I guess their concern is like if these survivors get put into this corner of like you're the map group, and then no one plays those characters and none of the cosmetics for those characters sell because no one wants to play like
Bro,
that.
our episode on info. I'll play maps.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I guess that's
I'll have the beam of light come down and just trail after me the entire time. I'll be
exactly.
mid chase just dropping them.
Yeah. But yeah, it would be cool if there was some changes to that. There hasn't really been any updates on that front other than like tweaks to the add-ons, mostly in the nerf department, like with the medkit, like styptic
Yeah.
and syringe. So that could be
Just
neat.
just a random idea that I had.
Yeah.
But I would like to see some kind of differentiation between the survivors, but
Yeah. And I kind of guess the last thing that we'll touch on, and I know something that you wanted to talk about a lot that they addressed is the FOV slider. That's something that's been asked for a long time. There's a lot of players that run Shadowborn to sort of deal with that motion sickness issue caused by playing in first person. That's something that I know that you've had to overcome. So if you want to kind of take it away, and I'll add on, I guess, in a little bit, but that is something that they said is coming later this year / early next year, like for sure.
yeah. So just a little bit of backstory for me. Back several years ago, because I'm old as shit now. I used to play a lot of Counter Strike 1.6. I played GoldenEye 64. I played Halo 2, a tiny bit of Halo 1, but like I played some first person shooters. I played some first person games. When I stopped playing those games for a while, I immediately got first person viewpoint motion sickness. And it was bad. It was to the point where I couldn't watch like a killer play on my phone. Like I would get sick to my stomach, I would get headaches, stuff like that. So over the course of many, many, many months, I think over the course of about a year, I trained my brain through watching on a small screen on my phone to watching small screen on my computer monitor to watching larger on my monitor, full screen on my, and then playing myself. And it took a very long time for me to be able to play a game as killer. And there's still some killers that I can't play. I cannot play nurse. I can't watch a nurse blink on my phone. I immediately get a headache and I immediately feel like the the ability that they're talking about with this FOV slider of allowing people like me to be able to play half of the game that we may not have had access to before is phenomenal. I'm I've got 3,500 hours in this game. I've been playing for 3 years. I had a vested interest to try and train myself to be able to take part in half of the game that I was missing out on that I couldn't partake in. But a lot of players don't have the kind of stubbornness or dedication that I do and just can't play killer, can't watch killer, can't enjoy half of the content. And so, similar to the color blindness features or the hard of hearing or deafness features with the visual terror radius, things that they can implement into the game to allow people like me, to allow people that are blind, colorblind or deaf or partially blind to be able to play more aspects of this game and to be able to enjoy it is phenomenal. And I don't know how these settings will allow me to play better because I haven't messed around with FOV sliders very much just because I haven't had the ability to like play first person games until relatively recently. But I know, for example, I tried Overwatch a little bit and it had an FOV slider and I played around with that a little bit, but I don't know how that's going to work with Dead by Daylight. But I'm just very happy and optimistic that they're including this feature, which maybe allow me to potentially, we'll see how it pans out, potentially play nurse. The kind of swaying that Oni has while he's my head, or the change in POV with monitor and abuse messes with me pretty badly too. And these things may be affected by this FOV slide. Now, along with this, we have to wonder what's going to happen with monitor and abuse. What's going to happen to Shadowborn? There's a couple different ways that we can go about it. Maybe I posed a subtle before we recorded. Maybe if you have Shadowborn or make monitor and abuse, maybe that affects the depth that you can change your FOV slider. Maybe they completely just rework Shadowborn to do something else entirely, and maybe they remove the FOV change for monitor and abuse because it still does the terror radius thing. We'll have to see how they go about it, but the fact that they're allowing people like me to be able to enjoy more aspects of this game is great, and I'm very happy about it, like from a personal vested interest.
Yeah, I mean, accessibility stuff, as we said, has been like, and quality of life stuff has like actually been something that they've done really well now for the past like year and a half, 2 years, something like that. With the colorblind mode, with putting the visual heartbeat, and now the FOV slider, they've done a lot of really great work, and I'm glad that they are actively taking those things into account and listening to the community, because all of these things have been asked for quite some time. I don't know if it's out of stubbornness that they didn't, or maybe they just didn't feel like it was worth their time with some of the old dev team. Whatever it is, clearly the people who are there now value it the way that it should be valued, which is really great. But yeah, like you said, it is fair to wonder, I think, what happens to Shadowborn, what happens to the FOV part of Monitor. And it's something that we also talked about prior, is like, what happens to Spine Chill now that like the visual heartbeats in the game, the visual heartbeat kind of does what Spine Chill does, minus not, Spine Chill gives you the like very, very minimal action speed increase when it lights up. It would be nice if those weren't just like duplicate features. I can't really see, how it's one of those things like how far could the FOV really go? Like you're stacking, like if you use the slider to its maximum and then you also have Shadowborn like that, or monitor, like that seems like it could be pretty insane and maybe like to the point
You
where it's
have
not necessary.
lizard eyes, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Like it just seems like it wouldn't be necessary. It'd be nice if those, and like that's what people have said about with Shadowborn. It's just like I shouldn't have to run this perk to play the game. I know that prior to the visual heartbeat, like Spine Chill was viewed in that way, where it's just like I shouldn't have to run Spine Chill to be able to just play the game. Um, it would be nice if those were just like perks, like any other perk, and that those accessibility things, like they're doing now, are just sort of baked into the core part of the settings and stuff that people can adjust as necessary. So we'll see what perks. I'm not sure if we're missing any other perks besides those three that kind of like overlap with the accessibility features. But yeah, it would be nice to get updates from those perks. But again, just a great job by Behavior that they're actually implementing this. And again, should be in approximately 6 months, give or take, is what it sounds like, which is not terribly far off, I would say. But that pretty much wraps it up. We're now, as we're recording this, less than a week from the new chapter releasing, so we'll get that,
We're
and then
just a few
short,
days.
shortly after, we're gonna have the anniversary chapter with all the mayhem of supposedly being able to use your invitations to spawn pallets or put the survivor into expose once you have bloodlust, or all these sorts of crazy things with the cosmetics, and I'm sure anniversary tome, all that kind of stuff. So we'll definitely
Can
touch
we
on
just
that.
real quick talk about they released, or maybe it was leaked, the official gameplay footage or the official trailer footage or whatever
Oh,
of
for
Nicolas
Nicholas.
Cage.
Yeah, they had it because it was at some summer games, some convention or something. He was like on stage. I know Behavior tweeted about it. It was just like he went up on stage with whoever was hosting or whatever, and I think he must have showed it
We'll
there.
put a link to it in the description, but I definitely recommend watching it and pay attention to when Nicolas Cage is running at the killer
Actively running
and
at the killer.
then the killer swings at him, and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
marvel and bask in the glory that is Nicolas Cage doing his best Keanu Reeves from the Matrix
yeah, yeah,
impersonation.
exactly. Um,
It's incredible.
but yeah, hopefully we get more on that. I assume in the next few weeks. I know that they targeted July for like the Nicolas Cage announcement stream, all that kind of stuff, where we'll get some more details. So, yeah, we have plenty of to look forward to for the game over the next month. Scrap, if you want to add on any, where can they find you on your socials and all that?
Yeah, twitch.tv/scrapbrainsec2, twitter.com/scrapbrainsec2. I recently took some time off. I had Subtle and some other friends at my house for my birthday and just a little get together. We called it ScrapCon. That's why we didn't have an episode last week, even though I tried to get us to do one live. But yeah, so I was doing that. I've been playing through like some Dark Souls. I'll be starting Dark Souls 2 here in the next few days. So if you're interested in that, come drop by.
Yep, and I'm on Z Subtle on all of my platforms, mostly on TikTok, Twitter, and Twitch. You can find me there, and yeah, I drop clips pretty regularly on TikTok and Twitter of just random DBD moments that we kind of stumble into in our matches.
My
So
man's posts some good hatchets.
yeah,
Go
yeah,
check
yeah.
him out.
So yeah, appreciate everyone tuning in, and we will see you next time. Later.
Peace.